I never expected it. Not in Sunday school, not in my Bible classes, not in the sermons I clung to for years searching for truth. But one quiet evening, I stumbled on something that shattered me, and I've never seen the Garden of Eden the same again. Now listen, I know this may sound heretical, but hear me out before you scroll past or write me off. Because what if Eve wasn't the villain? What if, just what if, Eve was the first to awaken, and the story we've all been told was never meant to protect us, but to control us? Stay with me. This will be hard to unhear. They told you the serpent was evil. They told you knowledge was forbidden. They told you Eve fell, and through her, we all fell too. But what they never told you is that Eve saw something no one else dared to see. Subscribe to this channel if you've ever felt something in the Bible was deeper than what they let on. We're not just reading scripture here, we're peeling back centuries of silence. Let me take you to the garden. Not the one in stained glass windows, but the real one. The garden where the Creator walked with humanity, and also the garden where humanity was told not to see. Because the tree of knowledge was not placed in the garden by accident. Think about it. Why would an all-knowing God place a tree of wisdom right in the middle of paradise and then command his creation not to touch it? That never made sense to me until I started to read the ancient texts that were left out of our Bibles, the ones early religious councils labeled dangerous. One of them whispered a truth so profound it made my hands shake. In Hebrew, the word for serpent, nahash, doesn't just mean snake. It also means to shine, to whisper, to bring knowledge. Does that sound like a deceiver? Or does it sound like a guide? Maybe, just maybe. The serpent didn't bring damnation. Maybe it brought initiation. That's what changed everything for me. Because Eve, she didn't fall. She chose. She saw the fruit. She saw what was hidden in plain sight. She reached and awakened. And what if that wasn't the beginning of sin, but the beginning of consciousness? Let me tell you what no preacher ever told me. The fall was never a punishment. It was a path into awareness, a path into responsibility, a path into your own divine nature. Yes, Eve reached for the forbidden. But what if it was forbidden not because it was evil, but because it was powerful? I believe God gave us free will not to blindly obey, but to seek him fully, to choose truth over comfort. So ask yourself this: who benefits from a version of the story where Eve is cursed for seeking wisdom? Who profits when you believe curiosity is rebellion and obedience is the only way to be saved? Let that settle, because the more I looked, the more I realized the garden wasn't about temptation. It was about transformation. And so I asked the question that changed my faith forever. What if Eve was not deceived, but called? What if she remembered something we were all made to forget? And if that's true, what else have we misunderstood? If this resonates with even a sliver of your soul, if something deep in you says, yes, I've always felt this too, then I need you to hit the subscribe button right now, because what comes next may shift everything. Because you weren't meant to stay in Eden, you were meant to awaken through it. Now let's go deeper. I remember the night I couldn't sleep. I was staring at the ceiling, heart racing, not because of fear, but because I had just read something that flipped every sermon I'd ever heard upside down. The Gnostic texts, the ones buried for centuries, banned, forgotten, or maybe deliberately hidden. One passage in particular whispered something ancient to my soul. It said, Eve saw that the fruit was not just good for food, but to make one wise. Not wicked, not disobedient, wise. That line echoed in me for days, because wisdom isn't evil, wisdom is divine. So why would any God forbid it? And suddenly, I saw it. The snake wasn't offering sin, the snake was offering sight. He wasn't hissing deception, he was whispering a question. What if there's more? And friend, that's when I realized Eve wasn't falling, she was climbing. Think about this with me. In almost every ancient civilization, Sumer, Egypt, even early Judaism, the serpent wasn't a villain. It was a symbol of transformation, of rebirth, of divine knowledge. In Egypt, the serpent coiled on the crown of pharaohs because it meant awakening. In Sumerian myth, the god Enki, who shared the serpent symbol, brought forbidden knowledge to humans and was punished for it. Sound familiar? And in Genesis, the snake is punished not for lying, but simply for offering truth too early, to those the architect still wanted asleep. It's not rebellion when you ask questions, it's Courage. So what was God protecting, really? Here's the part no one preaches from a pulpit. The fall didn't separate us from God, it separated us from control. Because when you awaken, when you see the world as it is, when your eyes are opened, you become dangerous, not to God, to systems, to the builders of boxes, to the ones who say, don't ask, don't taste, don't think. Eve was never the villain. She was the first prophet, the first to reach past fear, the first to remember that we are not slaves of Eden, but co-creators with God. I started seeing this pattern everywhere. The serpent appears in Moses' staff, healing the Israelites. Jesus tells us to be wise as serpents. Even the symbol of modern medicine is a serpent wrapped around a staff. So why would God use the same symbol for healing and divinity if it was evil? Because maybe it wasn't. Maybe what we were warned against was the very thing meant to set us free. And if Eve saw that, if she reached past the noise, past the rules, and heard God not as a booming voice, but as a still small whisper in her spirit, then what if you could too? What if the real question isn't why she ate, but why we still haven't? My own life started to shift. I stopped praying to obey and started praying to understand. I stopped fearing the fall and started asking, what is this fall leading me to awaken? And that's when the garden stopped being a myth and started becoming a mirror, because we're all standing under that tree. Every single day we're offered the same question. Will you eat the fruit and awaken, or will you obey and remain in comfortable ignorance? And before you answer quickly, let me ask you this. What fruit is being kept from you today? What truth is being labeled dangerous or forbidden in your life? By religion, by media, by culture? Because modern Eden doesn't have angels with flaming swords. It has distractions, algorithms, false narratives, and fears dressed up as morality. And just like Eve, you were never meant to stay in paradise if it meant staying asleep. You were supposed to wake up. You were supposed to reach for it. You were supposed to remember who you really are. And if you feel that stirring in your gut right now, if something in you is whispering, this is truth, even if it terrifies me, then you're not just watching a video. You're standing at the tree, and the choice is right in front of you. Subscribe right now if you're ready to go deeper, because in the next part, we're not just talking about Eve. We're talking about you. What's your fruit? What truth have you been told not to touch? The moment I realized I had been lied to, I didn't feel anger. I felt sadness, because if Eve wasn't the villain, if the serpent was the whisper of divine wisdom, if the fall wasn't punishment but invitation, then how many generations of us were born into silence, believing we were broken when we were actually chosen? I thought of all the times I felt guilty for asking questions, all the moments I bit my tongue in Bible study because I didn't want to sound rebellious, all the nights I begged God to forgive me for simply wondering. And then I asked myself something I want you to ask right now. What if the very question they told me not to ask is the one God has been waiting for me to ask all along? You see, religion has done a beautiful job of giving us structure, but in its fear of losing control, it sometimes silences the spirit. And Eve, she didn't wait for permission. She listened to the spirit stirring within her. She felt the vibration of truth, something ancient, something powerful, saying, you were never meant to stay blind, you were made to see. That's the true gospel hidden beneath layers of dogma and fear. Not the gospel of shame, not the gospel of submission, but the gospel of awakening. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Why would God place a tree of knowledge in the center of the garden, right where Eve could see it, if she wasn't meant to eventually taste it? Why allow a serpent to speak, unless that whisper was also part of the plan? Because God is not afraid of your awakening. He designed it. He didn't create robots. He created children with minds, hearts, and divine sparks of his own light. And every time you've questioned, every time your heart stirred and you felt something deeper than words, that was Eden calling you back. Not to a garden of rules, but to a reality where you walk with God, not behind him in blind obedience, but beside him in awakened love. I know this message is radical. I know it's the kind of thing that might get you unfollowed, unfriended, or even branded a heretic. But maybe heretics were just those who remembered something too early. Maybe Eve wasn't punished. Maybe she was initiated. Maybe the real fall was not the moment she bit into the fruit, but every time we denied ourselves the same right to taste, to ask, to evolve. Look around you. Today's forbidden fruit doesn't grow on trees. It's the idea that you are not broken, that you are not fallen, that you were never meant to be kept in line, but released into divine partnership, that you have something inside you more ancient than scripture, more sacred than dogma, a whisper, a knowing, a voice that says, you are not separate, you are divine, you are me. So what now? Now, you stop apologizing for your questions. You stop hiding from your hunger to know. You stop fearing the tree and start walking toward it. Because here's the truth. God doesn't fear your awakening. He's been waiting for it. He doesn't condemn your curiosity. He created it. He placed the tree right where it could be seen. And when Eve reached out, not in arrogance, but in faith, she fulfilled something holy. She took the first step back toward the divine within. So now the question is, will you? Will you dare to taste the truth? Will you remember what you were told to forget? Will you reclaim your birthright to walk with God, not as a sinner groveling for grace, but as a son, a daughter, an image bearer of divine light? That's what this story is really about. Not shame, not punishment, but remembering. You were always meant to remember. If this stirred something in your soul, don't scroll away. Subscribe, share this with someone else who's ready to hear the whisper. Comment, what truth are you ready to taste? This isn't just a story. It's a call, a return, a remembering. Welcome back to Eden. But this time, you walk in with your eyes wide open.